The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as Princess Elena walked slowly through the corridors she had known since childhood. Her silk slippers made no sound against the polished stone, but her heart hammered so loudly she was certain the guards could hear it echoing off the walls. Today was the day she had dreaded for months, the day she would meet Prince Marcus of Thornfield, the man her father had chosen to be her husband. Elena paused before a tall window that overlooked the palace gardens. The roses were in full bloom, their petals dancing in the gentle breeze like tiny dancers celebrating freedom. How she envied them. At 19, she had never known such freedom. Every moment of her life had been planned, every word she spoke measured, every step she took watched by dozens of eyes. And now even her heart was no longer her own to give. "Your Highness," came a soft voice behind her. Elena turned to see Lady Margaret, her lady-in-waiting and closest friend, approaching with careful steps. Margaret's face showed the same worry that had been etched there for weeks. "The king requests your presence in the blue drawing room. Prince Marcus has arrived." Elena's hands trembled as she smoothed down her emerald green dress. The fabric was exquisite, sewn with tiny pearls that caught the light, but it felt like a costume for a play she never wanted to perform in. "Tell me again, Margaret, what you heard about him from the servants who traveled with his party." Margaret's eyes darted around nervously before she spoke in hushed tones. "The stories are troubling, Your Highness. They speak of his terrible temper, of servants who flinch when he raises his voice. They say he has struck his own men for minor mistakes. And there are whispers about his first betrothal, the young lady from the Eastern Kingdoms who mysteriously broke the engagement and retreated to a convent." The princess felt her stomach twist into knots. She had heard these rumors too, but had hoped they were just the cruel gossip that often surrounded powerful men. Now, faced with the reality of meeting him, the stories felt more like warnings than idle chatter. As they walked toward the blue drawing room, Elena's mind wandered to Sir James, the kind and gentle knight who had captured her heart during the spring festival. His laugh was like music, his eyes held warmth that made her feel safe, and when he looked at her, she felt seen for who she truly was, not just for the crown she would one day wear. But Sir James was a second son with no lands, no fortune, and no hope of ever being deemed suitable for a princess. Their secret meetings in the library, their stolen moments in the garden, their whispered promises, all of it would have to remain buried deep in her heart. The massive doors of the blue drawing room loomed before them, guarded by two stern-faced men in the royal livery. Elena could hear voices from within, her father's booming laugh, and another voice, deeper and harder, that made her skin crawl even before she saw its owner. "Courage, my lady," Margaret whispered, squeezing Elena's hand briefly before the doors swung open. King Frederick stood near the fireplace, resplendent in his royal blue velvet coat, his crown catching the light from the chandelier above. Beside him stood a man who made Elena's breath catch in her throat, but not from admiration. Prince Marcus was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and sharp features that might have been handsome if not for the cruel set of his mouth and the cold calculation in his dark eyes. When he looked at her, she felt like prey being sized up by a predator. "Ah, my dear daughter," King Frederick beamed, seemingly oblivious to the tension that filled the room like smoke. Come and meet your betrothed. Prince Marcus, may I present Princess Elena." Prince Marcus stepped forward and took her hand, his grip too tight, his skin cold despite the warmth of the room. When he bent to kiss her hand, she caught a whiff of wine on his breath, even though it was barely past noon. "Your Highness," he said, his voice smooth but with an undertone that made her want to step back. "The rumors of your beauty do not do you justice." Elena managed a curtsy and a polite smile, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "The pleasure is mine, Your Highness." For the next hour, she sat through what felt like the longest conversation of her life. Prince Marcus spoke mostly to her father, discussing politics and trade agreements as if she weren't even there. When he did address her directly, it was with questions about her domestic skills, her ability to bear children, and her willingness to be guided by a firm hand. Each question felt like a small knife cutting away pieces of her soul. King Frederick, completely absorbed in the political advantages of the union, seemed blind to his daughter's distress. He spoke enthusiastically about the alliance between their kingdoms, the shared borders that would finally be secured, and the trade routes that would make both nations prosperous. Elena realized with growing horror that she was not a daughter to him in this moment. She was a bargaining chip, a pretty decoration to seal a deal. As the afternoon wore on, Prince Marcus grew bolder in his comments and his touches. He placed his hand on her arm when speaking to her, his fingers pressing just a little too hard. He commented on how spirited she seemed and how he looked forward to taming such fire. When she tried to contribute to the conversation about literature, he laughed dismissively and said that his wife would have no need for books beyond household management and perhaps some light poetry suitable for ladies. The breaking point came when her father excused himself to speak with his advisors about the wedding arrangements. Suddenly, alone with Prince Marcus, except for the ever-present but distant servants, Elena felt the walls of the beautiful room closing in around her. "You seem nervous, my dear," Prince Marcus said, moving closer to her on the ornate sofa. "There's no need for such timidity. I'm not an unreasonable man, as long as I am obeyed without question." His hand found her wrist, and his thumb pressed against her pulse point hard enough to leave marks. Elena tried to pull away gently, not wanting to cause a scene, but his grip tightened. "Please, Your Highness," she said quietly, "you're holding too tightly." Instead of releasing her, he leaned closer, his wine-scented breath hot against her ear. "You'll need to learn to accept a firm touch, Elena. A wife should never refuse her husband's attention or pull away from his affections. I think we should begin your education immediately." Terror flooded through Elena as she realized what he meant. This was not affection. This was ownership, dominance, a preview of what her life would become. She tried again to pull away, more urgently this time, but his other hand grabbed her shoulder, his fingers digging into her flesh through the delicate fabric of her dress. "You're hurting me," she whispered, genuine fear making her voice shake. But Prince Marcus only smiled, a cold and terrible expression. "Good," he said softly. "Pain teaches important lessons. And you, my dear princess, have many lessons to learn." Outside in the corridor, Sir James walked slowly past the blue drawing room, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the woman he loved was inside, meeting the man who would take her away forever. He had been assigned guard duty in this wing, a cruel twist of fate that forced him to be near Elena while being powerless to help her. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, not from any conscious thought, but from the soldier's instinct that something was wrong. The other guards in the hallway, Sir Thomas, Sir Robert, and young Sir David, had all noticed the tension that seemed to radiate from behind the closed doors. They had heard rumors about Prince Marcus, whispers that made their blood run cold when they thought of their beloved princess married to such a man. But they were soldiers bound by duty and honor to obey their king, even when their hearts rebelled against his commands. As the afternoon light began to fade and shadows grew longer in the corridor, an uneasy silence settled over the palace. Servants hurried past with their eyes downcast, as if they too could sense that something dark was stirring in the beautiful rooms they tended with such care. Even the birds outside seemed to have stopped singing. Inside the blue drawing room, Elena's world had shrunk to the space between Prince Marcus's hands and her desperate need to escape them. Every attempt she made to create distance between them was met with a tighter grip, a harder pressure, a reminder of how completely powerless she was in this moment. The princess who had once dreamed of ruling with wisdom and compassion now couldn't even rule over her own body. The elaborate tapestries on the walls, depicting heroic knights rescuing fair maidens, seemed to mock her predicament. Where were the heroes when she needed them? Where was the rescue that the stories promised always came just in time? As Prince Marcus's grip tightened further and his intentions became clearer, Elena realized with dawning horror that her fairy tale had become a nightmare. And, unlike the stories, there might be no happy ending waiting for her at all. The grip on Elena's wrist grew tighter with each passing moment, and she could feel her pulse throbbing against Prince Marcus's thumb. His eyes had taken on a predatory gleam that made her stomach lurch with fear. The beautiful drawing room that had always been a place of comfort now felt like a prison, the heavy velvet drapes blocking any view of the outside world where help might come from. "Please," Elena whispered again, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "My father will return soon. Perhaps we should wait for him before we continue our conversation." Prince Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was cold and calculating, like the laugh of a cat playing with a mouse before delivering the killing blow. Your father is meeting with his advisors about our wedding feast. He'll be occupied for quite some time discussing the guest list and the political implications of our union. That gives us plenty of privacy to get better acquainted. His free hand moved from her shoulder to trace along her collarbone, his touch making her skin crawl. Elena tried once more to pull away, but his grip was like iron. The pain in her wrist was becoming sharper now, and she was certain there would be bruises tomorrow, if there was a tomorrow where such small hurts still mattered. You know, Prince Marcus continued conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather rather than her growing terror. I've been watching you since I arrived. The way you carry yourself, the way you speak to the servants with such kindness. It's charming, really, but quite impractical for a queen. My mother was much the same when she married my father, too soft, too gentle. But she learned quickly enough where such behavior leads. Elena's blood ran cold. What do you mean? I mean, my dear, that kindness is seen as weakness by those who would challenge your authority. A queen must rule with strength, with fear, if necessary. My father taught my mother that lesson very thoroughly. His smile was sharp as a blade. And now I'll teach it to you. Before Elena could respond, Prince Marcus stood abruptly, pulling her up with him by her trapped wrist. The sudden movement sent shooting pain up her arm, and she couldn't suppress a small cry of distress. He seemed pleased by her reaction, his grip shifting to both her arms now, holding her in place directly in front of him. Much better, he said approvingly. You see how quickly you respond to the proper motivation? We'll get along splendidly once you understand your place. Elena's mind raced desperately, searching for any way to escape this nightmare. The servants who remained in a room had their backs turned, busying themselves with unnecessary tasks, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but unwilling or unable to interfere. She was completely alone with a man who seemed to view her pain as entertainment and her fear as submission. I think, Prince Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, that we should discuss some of the expectations I'll have for our marriage. For instance, you'll find that I have very particular ideas about obedience, about respect, about what happens when those things are lacking. His hands moved to her shoulders again, and this time his grip was deliberately painful. His thumbs pressed into the soft spots just above her collarbones, finding pressure points that made her gasp. When she tried to step back, he followed, backing her against the wall beside the tall windows she had looked through with such longing just hours ago. You see, he continued, apparently enjoying her trapped position, my first betrothed had some difficulty understanding these concepts. Lady Catherine was much like you, spirited, independent, full of romantic notions about love and partnership in marriage. His laugh was bitter and cruel. I had to be quite firm in correcting those misconceptions. Elena's heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it. What happened to Lady Catherine? Oh, she learned her lessons eventually, though perhaps I was a bit enthusiastic in my teaching methods. The bruises took weeks to fade completely, and she was never quite the same afterward. Became quite timid, really. Jumpy at sudden movements, tears at the slightest provocation. Her family decided she wasn't quite ready for marriage after all. His smile was genuinely pleased at the memory. They sent her to that convent, you know, said she needed time for prayer and reflection, though I suspect what she really needed was time to heal. The casual way he spoke about hurting another woman, about breaking her spirit so thoroughly that she fled to a religious life rather than marry him, made Elena feel sick. This wasn't just a cruel man. This was a monster wearing a prince's title and fine clothes. Now, Prince Marcus said, leaning closer until his face was mere inches from hers, I prefer not to have such difficulties with you. You seem intelligent enough to learn from another's mistakes rather than repeat them. So I'll ask you directly, are you going to be a good, obedient wife? Or will you require the same educational methods that Lady Catherine needed? Elena's throat felt dry as sand. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to fight, to run, to scream for help. But she was trapped between his body and the wall, his hands on her shoulders like shackles, and the very real threat of violence hanging in the air between them like a sword. She started, then stopped, not knowing what words could possibly save her from this moment. Yes, he prompted, his grip tightening incrementally. I'm waiting for your answer, my dear. Outside in the corridor, Sir James had stopped walking entirely. Something was wrong. every instinct he developed through years of combat, and danger was screaming warnings in his head. The blue drawing room had gone too quiet. There should be conversation, laughter, the normal sounds of a pleasant social visit between royalty. Instead, there was only an ominous silence that made his blood run cold. He looked at the other guard stationed nearby. Sir Thomas was frowning, his weathered face creased with concern. Young Sir David kept glancing at the closed doors with obvious anxiety. Even Sir Robert, normally as stoic as a stone statue, seemed uneasy. "Do you hear that?" Sir James whispered to Sir Thomas. "Hear what?" Thomas replied, but his hand had instinctively moved to rest on his sword hilt. "Exactly. Nothing. It's too quiet in there." Sir Thomas strained his ears, and gradually his frown deepened. "You're right. Even quiet conversation should carry some sound through those doors. And where's the king?" "He said he'd be back shortly." Before James could respond, they heard something that made every guard in the corridor tense with alarm. A soft but unmistakable cry of distress. It was quiet, muffled, but it was definitely Princess Elena's voice, and she sounded afraid. The guards exchanged rapid glances. Their duty was clear: protect the royal family above all else. But the situation was delicate. Prince Marcus was a royal guest, a future member of the family through marriage. They couldn't simply burst into the room based on a moment of unclear sound. The political implications could be disastrous. But then, they heard it again, slightly louder this time, and there was no mistaking the fear and pain in their princess's voice. Inside the room, Elena had reached her breaking point. Prince Marcus's hands had moved to her throat now, not quite choking, but making his threat abundantly clear. His body pressed against hers, pinning her to the wall, and his breath was hot against her face as he spoke in low, threatening tones about all the ways he planned to educate her once they were married. "Please stop," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "You're frightening me." "Good," he replied. "Fear is the beginning of wisdom for wives. Fear teaches respect, and respect ensures obedience." Lady Catherine learned that lesson very well indeed, though it took several sessions before it truly took hold. His hand moved from her throat to her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone in a mockery of gentleness before his grip tightened on her jaw. "Shall we begin your first lesson now, my dear? Or will you promise to be a quick learner?" Elena closed her eyes, tears threatening to spill over. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be the life stretching out before her. Years of fear, of walking on eggshells, of being hurt by the very man who should protect her above all others. The weight of her royal duty pressed down on her like a physical thing, but the fear for her immediate safety was even heavier. When she opened her eyes again, Prince Marcus was watching her with obvious satisfaction. He could see her spirit breaking, see her beginning to accept the reality of her powerlessness, and it pleased him immensely. But what he didn't see, what none of them could see, was a shadow that had fallen across the crack beneath the door, the shadow of a guard who had heard enough, who had finally decided that duty to protect the innocent outweighed protocol and political consequences. Sir James pressed his ear to the door, straining to hear more clearly what was happening inside. What he heard made his blood boil with rage, and his hand tightened on his sword hilt until his knuckles went white. The princess, his princess, the woman he loved more than his own life, was being threatened and hurt, and he was standing outside like a helpless fool worried about proper procedure. The other guards gathered around him, their faces grim as they too began to understand what was happening beyond those doors. Sir Thomas, a father of daughters himself, looked ready to break down the doors with his bare hands. Young Sir David's face had gone pale, but his jaw was set with determination. Even Sir Robert had abandoned his usual stoic expression for one of barely controlled fury. "We have to do something," James whispered urgently. "Protocol be damned, she's in danger." "But Prince Marcus is a royal guest," Sir David whispered back, though his voice shook with suppressed anger. "If we're wrong about what we're hearing, we're not wrong," Sir Thomas interrupted grimly. "I've heard that tone of voice before, lad. That's a woman being threatened by a man who means her harm. Royal guest or not, no one hurts our princess while we're on duty." They were still hesitating, still weighing duty against duty, when Elena's voice came through the door again, louder this time, and filled with unmistakable terror and pain. "You're hurting me," she cried out, the words carrying clearly into the corridor and striking each guard like a physical blow. That was enough. Sir James didn't care about consequences anymore, didn't care about political ramifications or proper procedure or anything except getting to Elena before Prince Marcus could hurt her any further. His hand found the door handle just as Sir Thomas grabbed his shoulder. "Wait," the older knight whispered. "If we're doing this, we do it right. We announce ourselves, give them a chance to explain what we've heard. That way, if there's an innocent explanation, no one loses face. But if there isn't," his grim smile promised that Prince Marcus would deeply regret his choices. Sir James nodded curtly. Every second they delayed could mean more harm to Elena. But Sir Thomas was right. They needed to handle this carefully to protect her reputation as well as her safety. The guards took their positions, flanking the door. Sir James straightened his shoulders, called upon all his years of training to keep his voice steady and professional, and knocked firmly on the door. "Your Highness," he called out in his most official tone, "forgive the interruption, but the king has returned and requests an immediate audience with both your highnesses." It was a lie, but it was a lie that might save Elena's life and give them the justification they needed to enter the room. Inside, they could hear sudden movement, muffled voices, and what sounded like Prince Marcus cursing under his breath. One moment came the prince's voice, though it sounded strained and angry. The guards waited, every muscle tensed, ready to act if they heard any further sounds of distress. In those few seconds of silence, each of them made the same silent promise. Whatever happened next, Princess Elena would not be hurt again on their watch, regardless of the cost to themselves. The moment Sir James announced the king's supposed return, Prince Marcus released Elena so abruptly that she stumbled, nearly falling before catching herself against the wall. Her relief was overwhelming, but it was mixed with a new terror. What would happen when the guards discovered the king wasn't actually waiting for them? What would Prince Marcus do to her then, when they were truly alone again? "Compose yourself," Prince Marcus hissed at her, his voice low and venomous. "If you say one word about our conversation to anyone, your father, these guards, anyone, I will make you regret it for the rest of your very short engagement. Do you understand me?" Elena nodded mutely, her hands shaking as she tried to smooth down her dress and arrange her hair. She could feel the places where his fingers had gripped her arms and shoulders beginning to ache, and she knew there would be bruises tomorrow. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing realization that this was only the beginning. If she married this man, this would be her life, threats, intimidation, and worse. Prince Marcus straightened his own clothing and ran a hand through his dark hair, transforming himself in seconds from a menacing predator back into the polished, charming prince he pretended to be in public. The speed of the transformation was almost more terrifying than the threats themselves. How many people had he fooled with this mask? How many had suffered because no one could see the monster beneath? "Enter," Prince Marcus called out, his voice now perfectly controlled and pleasant. The door opened, and Sir James stepped in first, his trained eyes immediately sweeping the room for signs of danger. What he saw made his jaw clench with barely controlled fury. Princess Elena stood near the window, her face pale and her hands visibly trembling. Her dress was slightly askew, and there were red marks on her wrists that were already beginning to darken. Most telling of all was the way she held herself. Arms crossed protectively over her chest, shoulders hunched as if expecting another blow. Prince Marcus, in contrast, stood casually near the fireplace, the picture of aristocratic ease. But James noticed the tension in the prince's shoulders, the slight flush in his cheeks, and the way his eyes held a warning as they met the guards' gazes. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion," Prince Marcus said smoothly. "The king hasn't returned yet. Perhaps you were mistaken about his message." Sir James felt the trap closing around them. If he admitted to lying about the king's return, he would have to explain why they had felt justified in interrupting a private meeting between royalty. But looking at Elena's frightened face and the evidence of rough treatment written clearly on her body, he knew they had been right to intervene. "My apologies, Your Highness," James replied carefully, "but we heard sounds of distress from this room. It is our duty to ensure the safety of all members of the royal family." Prince Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. "Sounds of distress? How curious. Princess Elena and I were simply having an enthusiastic discussion about our upcoming wedding. Perhaps the passion in our conversation was misinterpreted by those listening at doors." The subtle accusation hung in the air like smoke. Prince Marcus was suggesting that the guards had been eavesdropping inappropriately, turning their concern for Elena's safety into a breach of protocol that could see them disciplined or dismissed. It was a masterful manipulation, and James felt a grudging respect for the prince's tactical mind, even as he despised everything else about the man. But then Elena spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the tense silence. "Thank you for your concern," she said, and James's heart broke at the defeat in her tone. I was indeed a bit overwhelmed by the excitement of wedding planning. His Highness was merely trying to comfort me when I became emotional. It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. Elena was providing Prince Marcus with the explanation he needed to deflect suspicion, probably because she'd been threatened with worse consequences if she didn't. The princess was protecting her abuser, trapped by fear and the knowledge that no one would believe her word against that of a prince. Sir Thomas stepped forward, his weathered face a mask of professional concern. Perhaps the princess would benefit from some fresh air? The gardens are particularly lovely at this time of day. It was a subtle offer of escape, a chance to get Elena away from Prince Marcus, even temporarily. But the prince was too clever to miss the implication. "What a thoughtful suggestion," Prince Marcus replied, moving smoothly to Elena's side. "We were just discussing the need for some air ourselves. Perhaps a stroll through the rose garden would be delightful. Elena, my dear, shall we?" He offered her his arm with perfect courtly grace, but James saw the way his fingers pressed just a bit too firmly against her hand when she took it. The message was clear. She would go with him willingly, or there would be consequences later. Elena managed a weak smile. "That sounds lovely." As they prepared to leave the room, Sir James made a desperate decision. "Your Highness," he called out, addressing Elena directly, "perhaps you would prefer an escort of guards for your walk? The gardens can be quite secluded, and your father would want to ensure your complete safety." Prince Marcus's eyes flashed with anger at the suggestion, but he couldn't refuse without appearing suspicious. A royal prince should welcome protection for his betrothed, not resist it. "Of course," he replied through gritted teeth, though his grip on Elena's arm tightened visibly. "Though I hardly think such precautions are necessary. I am quite capable of protecting my future wife." "I'm certain you are, Your Highness," Sir James replied smoothly. "But the king's orders regarding the princess's security are quite specific. I'm afraid we must insist." It was another lie, but a necessary one. James was buying them time, ensuring that Elena wouldn't be alone with Prince Marcus again until they could figure out how to help her more permanently. As they left the drawing room, Elena felt like she was walking in a waking nightmare. Prince Marcus maintained his charming facade for the guards, pointing out various features of the palace architecture and making pleasant conversation about the weather. But his hand on her arm was like a shackle, and his occasional squeeze served as a constant reminder of his earlier threats. The rose garden was indeed beautiful, with paths winding between beds of flowers in every color imaginable. Under different circumstances, Elena would have found it peaceful, romantic even. Now it felt like a beautiful prison, with Prince Marcus as her jailer, and the guards as unwilling witnesses to her captivity. "These roses are magnificent," Prince Marcus commented, stopping beside a bed of deep red blooms. "The color reminds me of the tapestries in my castle back home. You'll love it there, my dear. It's very private, very quiet, far from the distractions and influences you've grown accustomed to hear." Elena understood the threat immediately. Once they were married, and she was in his territory, surrounded by his people, she would be completely at his mercy. No friendly guards, no familiar faces, no one who might notice or care if she was hurt. Sir James, walking a careful distance behind them, caught the implications as well. His hand rested on his sword hilt, and he had to constantly remind himself that he couldn't simply draw steel and end this farce. Prince Marcus was still technically under the protection of guest rights, and Elena was still officially his willing betrothed. Without clear proof of wrongdoing or Elena's explicit request for help, the guards were bound by law and duty to protect both royals equally. But James was beginning to formulate a desperate plan. If he couldn't act directly, perhaps he could find someone who could. The king needed to know what kind of man he was giving his daughter to, but it would take more than a guard's word to convince him. Royal fathers have been marrying their daughters to monsters for political advantage for centuries. King Frederick wouldn't be the first to sacrifice his child's happiness for his kingdom's security. What James needed was evidence, witnesses, something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. And He needed Elena to understand that she didn't have to face this alone, that there were people who would fight for her if she would only ask. As they rounded a corner of the garden path, Elena stumbled slightly, catching herself with a small gasp of pain. Prince Marcus had yanked her arm just hard enough to throw her off balance, making it look like an accident to the watching guards. "Careful, my dear," he said with false concern. "We wouldn't want you to hurt yourself before the wedding. Though you should probably get used to being a bit more careful. Wives need to watch their step much more closely than princesses do." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly. She couldn't afford to show more weakness, couldn't give Prince Marcus more ammunition to use against her. But the constant fear was wearing her down, making it hard to think clearly or plan any kind of escape. That's when she noticed something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. There, partially hidden behind a large sculpture of a dancing nymph, stood a familiar figure. Sir David, the youngest of her guards, was stationed at his post, but positioned in such a way that he could see everything happening on the garden path. And his face, when he caught sight of Elena's distress, was a picture of barely controlled rage. More importantly, Sir David wasn't just any guard. He was the nephew of Father Benedict, the palace chaplain, and Elena knew that anything David saw and reported would be taken seriously by the one man in the kingdom who might have the moral authority to challenge even a royal wedding. Elena caught David's eye for just a moment, and in that brief contact, she tried to convey everything she couldn't say aloud. The young guard's eyes widened with understanding, and he gave the slightest nod to show he had received her silent plea for help. For the first time since Prince Marcus had arrived, Elena felt a tiny spark of hope. She wasn't completely alone. People were watching, people were beginning to understand, and perhaps, just perhaps, someone would find a way to save her before it was too late. But that spark of hope was quickly extinguished when Prince Marcus leaned close to her ear and whispered, "I saw that little exchange, my dear. I hope you're not thinking of doing something foolish. Remember what I told you about the consequences of seeking help where none is wanted." Elena's blood turned to ice. How much had he seen? How much did he understand about the silent communication that had just passed between her and Sir David? And, more terrifyingly, what would he do about it? Prince Marcus straightened up, his public mask sliding back into place as he addressed the guards cheerfully. "I think the princess may be getting tired. Perhaps we should return to the palace? All this excitement about our upcoming wedding has quite worn her out." As they turned back toward the palace, Elena felt the weight of despair settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had tried to ask for help, and Prince Marcus had noticed immediately. Now he would be even more watchful, even more controlling. And she was running out of time to find a way to escape the nightmare her life was becoming. Behind them, Sir David stood frozen at his post, his mind racing as he processed what he had just witnessed. The princess was in terrible danger, and he was perhaps the only person who could get word to someone with the power to help her. The question was whether he could act quickly enough, and whether anyone would believe the word of a young guard against that of a prince. The afternoon shadows were growing longer, and Elena knew that in just a few hours, Prince Marcus would expect to dine with her family. Then there would be the formal announcement of their engagement, the signing of treaties, and all the political machinery that would make their marriage inevitable. Time was running out, and Elena could feel the walls of her golden cage closing in around her with every step that took her back toward the palace and the life of terror that awaited her there. The evening bells had begun to chime across the palace grounds as Elena sat before her vanity mirror, trying to prepare herself for what felt like her last meal as a free woman. Tomorrow, the formal engagement ceremony would take place, and after that, there would be no turning back. She stared at her reflection, noting the dark circles under her eyes, and the way her hands continued to tremble no matter how hard she tried to steady them. Lady Margaret moved quietly around the room, helping Elena dress for dinner while shooting worried glances at her mistress. The bruises on Elena's arms had darkened considerably, and Margaret had gasped in horror when she had seen them while helping the princess change. "My lady," Margaret whispered as she fastened Elena's necklace. "Those marks, how did this happen?" Elena met her friend's eyes in the mirror, seeing her own fear reflected there. "It was an accident, Margaret. I bruise easily, you know." But Margaret had been Elena's companion since childhood, and she knew every expression on the princess's face. This was not clumsiness or accident. This was the result of deliberate harm. "Princess, you must tell someone. Your father, The Queen Mother, someone who can tell them what? Elena interrupted, her voice hollow with despair. That my betrothed was teaching me about marriage? That I was clumsy and fell? Margaret, who would believe me? And even if they did, what could they do? The treaties are already signed, the alliance already promised. My father would never break his word over what he would see as pre-wedding nervousness. Margaret's face crumpled with anguish. She had watched Elena grow from a spirited little girl into a compassionate young woman, and the thought of her being trapped in a marriage with a monster was almost unbearable. But she also knew the brutal realities of royal politics. Elena was right. Even clear evidence of abuse might not be enough to break an engagement that secured the kingdom's future. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Margaret went to answer it, returning with young Sir David, who looked unusually serious for someone barely 20 years old. Your Highness, he said, bowing deeply, I have a message from Father Benedict. He requests a private audience with you before dinner, if you can spare the time. Elena's heart jumped with desperate hope. Father Benedict was one of the few people in the palace who might have both the moral authority and the courage to challenge what was happening to her. Of course. Where would he like to meet? In the chapel library, Your Highness. He says he has some wedding preparations to discuss with you. Elena understood immediately. The chapel library was one of the few truly private places in the palace, a sacred space where even the king couldn't intrude without invitation. If Father Benedict wanted to speak with her there, it meant Sir David had managed to convey her desperate situation. Tell Father Benedict I'll be there shortly, Elena said, trying to keep the hope out of her voice in case the walls had ears. As Sir David left, Margaret grabbed Elena's hands. Be careful, my lady, if Prince Marcus discovers where you've gone. I know, Elena whispered. But, Margaret, this might be my only chance. If Father Benedict can't help me then, I truly am lost. The walk to the chapel felt like the longest of Elena's life. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every footstep might be Prince Marcus coming to drag her back. But she made it to the chapel library without incident, slipping through the heavy wooden door into the sanctuary of books and sacred silence. Father Benedict was waiting for her, his kind face grave with concern. He was an elderly man with gentle eyes and silver hair, but there was a strength in him that came from decades of standing up for the innocent and defenseless. When he saw Elena's bruised wrists and the haunted look in her eyes, his expression hardened with righteous anger. My child, he said softly, taking her hands in his weathered ones, Sir David has told me something of your situation. I need you to tell me everything, no matter how difficult it may be to speak of. The kindness in his voice, the first genuine compassion she had encountered all day, broke down Elena's carefully constructed walls. The words poured out of her. Prince Marcus's threats, his violence, his casual mention of what he had done to Lady Catherine. She told Father Benedict about the fear that seemed to grow with every breath, about the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. Father Benedict listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. When Elena finished, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the implications of what he had heard. My child, he finally said, what you describe is not marriage. It is slavery. It is a mockery of the sacred bond that marriage is meant to be. No woman should be forced to endure such treatment, royal or not. But, Father, Elena whispered, what can be done? The king has given his word. The alliance has been promised. Even if you spoke to him, would he believe you over a prince? And, even if he did, would he be willing to risk war to protect one woman? Father Benedict's eyes flashed with something that reminded Elena that he had once been a soldier before taking holy orders. You underestimate your worth, child, both to your father and to your people. But you're right that we need more than just testimony to convince the king. We need evidence that cannot be denied or explained away. What kind of evidence? The kind that Prince Marcus will likely provide himself if we give him the opportunity. Men like him cannot resist the chance to demonstrate their power, especially when they feel secure in their position. Father Benedict leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. I have a plan, but it will require great courage from you, and it will put you in danger one more time. Elena's stomach clenched with fear, but she nodded. What do you need me to do? Tonight, after dinner, when the formal negotiations begin, I want you to excuse yourself and retire to your chambers early. Prince Marcus will likely follow you, especially if you seem upset or emotional. When he does, I want you to leave your chamber door slightly ajar, and I want you to provoke him into revealing his true nature. Father, you're asking me to deliberately anger a man who has already hurt me. What if he, Sir James, and I will be listening just outside. The moment things go too far, we'll intervene. But we need Prince Marcus to threaten you, to reveal his intentions, in front of witnesses who cannot be dismissed or intimidated. Elena's hands shook at the thought of deliberately provoking Prince Marcus's anger, but she also understood the wisdom of Father Benedict's plan. And if it works, if you have witnesses to his threats, then I will personally escort you to your father and demand that he hear the truth about the man he's chosen for you. A king may ignore rumors and suspicions, but he cannot ignore direct testimony from his chaplain and his most trusted guards. A sound from outside made them both freeze, footsteps in the corridor coming closer. Father Benedict quickly ushered Elena toward a small side door that led directly to the garden. Go back to your chambers through the garden entrance, he whispered. Act as if you've been there all along. And, Elena, remember that you're not alone in this. There are people who will fight for you, no matter the cost. Elena slipped out into the twilight garden just as the main door to the library opened. Through a crack in the side door, she saw Prince Marcus enter, his face dark with suspicion. Father Benedict, she heard him say in a voice like silk over steel, I was told Princess Elena came this way. I was hoping to escort her to dinner myself. I'm afraid I haven't seen the princess this evening. Your Highness, Father Benedict replied calmly. I've been preparing for tomorrow's ceremony. Perhaps she returned to her chambers to prepare for dinner? Elena didn't wait to hear more of the conversation. She ran through the garden as quietly as she could, her heart pounding with the knowledge that Prince Marcus was actively hunting for her now. He must have noticed her absence and suspected she was seeking help. When she reached her chambers through the garden entrance, she found Margaret pacing frantically. Oh, thank heavens, Margaret gasped. Prince Marcus came here looking for you not 10 minutes ago. He was very displeased when I told him you weren't here. I think he suspected I was lying. Elena quickly filled Margaret in on Father Benedict's plan, watching her friend's face go pale with fear. Princess, this is madness. If Prince Marcus realizes it's a trap, if I don't take this chance, Margaret, then tomorrow I'll be formally engaged to a monster, and there will be no escape after that. I have to try. A bell chimed in the distance, signaling that it was time for dinner. Elena took a deep breath, trying to center herself for the performance of her lifetime. She had to appear normal during the meal, then excuse herself at just the right moment to set Father Benedict's plan in motion. Whatever happens tonight, Elena told Margaret, gripping her friend's hands tightly, I want you to know that you've been like a sister to me. If this goes wrong, don't speak of such things, Margaret interrupted, tears streaming down her face. It won't go wrong. It can't. But, as Elena prepared to leave for dinner, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something that would change everything, one way or another. Tonight would either be the beginning of her freedom or the end of any hope for escape. In the chapel library, Father Benedict knelt before the altar and prayed for strength, for wisdom, and for the safety of the young woman who was about to risk everything for the chance to be free. He prayed, too, for forgiveness for what he was about to do, deliberately putting Elena in harm's way, even for the greater good. And, in the corridor outside Elena's chambers, Sir James took up his position for the evening watch, his sword loose in its sheath, and his ears straining for any sound that might indicate the princess was in danger. He didn't know exactly what Father Benedict had planned, but he knew something was going to happen tonight that would determine Elena's fate once and for all. The dinner bell chimed again, more insistently this time, and across the palace, the players in this deadly game began moving toward their appointed places. The night was young, but before it was over, secrets would be revealed, loyalties would be tested, and Princess Elena would discover whether courage and truth were stronger than power and intimidation. In her chambers, Elena looked one last time at her reflection, seeing not the frightened girl who had faced Prince Marcus that morning, but a young woman prepared to fight for her freedom no matter the cost. Tonight, she would either save herself or die trying, and either outcome seemed preferable to the living death of marriage to a monster. The game was about to begin, and Elena walked toward the dining hall with her head held high, ready to play the most important role of her life. The grand dining hall blazed with the light of 100 candles, their flames dancing across the polished silver and crystal that adorned the long mahogany table. King Frederick sat at the head of the table, resplendent in his royal blue velvet, completely oblivious to the undercurrents of tension that swirled around the feast he had arranged to celebrate his daughter's engagement. Elena entered the hall with her head held high, though her stomach churned with nervous energy. Prince Marcus rose from his seat as she approached, offering her a bow that appeared respectful to the watching courtiers but held an edge of mockery that only she could detect. When he took her hand to escort her to her seat, his grip was just tight enough to remind her of their earlier encounter. "You look lovely this evening, my dear," he said loud enough for others to hear, but his thumb pressed against the bruises on her wrist with deliberate cruelty. "Though you seem a bit pale. I hope you're not feeling unwell." "Just a touch of nervousness about tomorrow's ceremony," Elena replied, matching his public tone while fighting the urge to pull away from his touch. "I'm sure it will pass." As the first course was served, Elena forced herself to eat and make polite conversation, all while watching for the right moment to execute Father Benedict's plan. The chaplain sat several seats away, his expression carefully neutral, but she caught him glancing at her occasionally with encouraging nods. Prince Marcus dominated the conversation, regaling the table with stories of his kingdom's military victories and hunting expeditions. Elena noticed how many of his tales involved violence, domination over both animals and people. It was as if he couldn't help but reveal his true nature, even while trying to charm her father. And then Prince Marcus was describing a recent hunt. "When the stag refused to go down cleanly, I had to finish it with my bare hands. Sometimes mercy is cruelty, and the strong must be willing to do what the weak cannot stomach." King Frederick nodded approvingly. "Spoken like a true leader, my boy." Elena could learn much from such decisive action. Elena's blood ran cold at her father's words. He was already seeing her as something that needed to be controlled, guided by her future husband's strong hand. How blind was he to what was happening right in front of him? As the evening progressed, Elena began to exhibit signs of distress that weren't entirely feigned. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her wine glass, and she jumped when a servant accidentally dropped a spoon nearby. Prince Marcus watched her growing agitation with obvious satisfaction, interpreting it as evidence that his earlier lesson was taking hold. "My dear," he said during a lull in conversation, his voice dripping with false concern, "you do seem quite overwrought. Perhaps you should retire early to ensure you're well rested for tomorrow's ceremony." It was exactly the opening Elena had been waiting for. "Yes," she said, rising from her seat with what appeared to be genuine distress. "I think I do need some air and quiet. Please forgive me, Father, Your Highness. The excitement has quite overwhelmed me." King Frederick waved her away dismissively, already turning back to his discussion of trade agreements with Prince Marcus's advisors. "Of course, my dear. Rest well." Prince Marcus half rose from his seat. "Perhaps I should escort you to ensure you reach your chambers safely?" "Oh no," Elena said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I wouldn't want to take you away from these important discussions. I'm sure I can manage the short walk to my rooms." The refusal clearly irritated Prince Marcus, and Elena saw a flash of anger cross his features before he controlled himself. "As you wish, my dear. Sleep well." Elena curtsied to the table and left the dining hall, her heart pounding with the knowledge that she had just set Father Benedict's plan in motion. Now she had to trust that the chaplain and Sir James would be in position when Prince Marcus inevitably came looking for her. She made her way to her chambers slowly, giving Prince Marcus time to make his excuses and follow her. In her room, Margaret was waiting with obvious anxiety. "Is it time?" Margaret whispered. "Yes." Father Benedict said to leave the door slightly open and to provoke Prince Marcus into revealing his true nature. "You should hide in the inner chamber, and whatever you hear, don't come out unless I scream for help." Margaret's face went white, but she nodded and disappeared into the adjoining dressing room, pulling the door almost closed but leaving it open just enough to hear what happened. Elena positioned herself near the window, trying to look upset and vulnerable. She didn't have to wait long. Heavy footsteps in the corridor announced Prince Marcus's arrival, though he took the precaution of dismissing his own escort before approaching her door. "Elena, my dear." His voice came through the slightly opened door. "May I come in? I'm concerned about your health." Elena took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment of truth. "Please, Your Highness, I need some time alone." Instead of respecting her wishes, Prince Marcus pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it behind him with a soft click. The sound sent ice through Elena's veins, but she reminded herself that Father Benedict and Sir James were listening just outside. Alone, Prince Marcus asked, his mask of concern already beginning to slip. "My dear, you seem to have some very strange ideas about marriage. A wife does not get to be alone when her husband wishes to see her." "We're not married yet," Elena said, trying to inject some strength into her voice. Prince Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A mere technicality. Tomorrow's ceremony will simply make official what is already fact. You belong to me now. And I think it's time you fully understood what that means." He moved closer, and Elena forced herself to stand her ground instead of backing away. "I don't belong to anyone. I am a princess of this realm, not property to be owned." The slap came so fast Elena didn't see it coming. The sound cracked through the room like a whip, and her cheek burned with the impact. Outside the door, she heard a sharp intake of breath, and the soft scrape of metal, Sir James drawing his sword. "You will learn respect," Prince Marcus said coldly, "or you will learn pain. The choice is yours." Elena touched her burning cheek, tears of shock and pain blurring her vision. But she forced herself to speak, knowing that Father Benedict needed to hear Prince Marcus's true intentions. "Is this what you did to Lady Catherine? Is this how you broke her spirit?" Prince Marcus's eyes lit up with cruel pleasure. "Ah, you want to know about Catherine? Yes, I educated her quite thoroughly. She thought she could defy me too, at first. She had such fire, such ridiculous ideas about love and partnership in marriage." He grabbed Elena's shoulders, his fingers digging into the bruises he had left earlier. It took weeks of careful instruction before she learned her place. By the end, she was so perfectly obedient. She wouldn't speak without permission, wouldn't meet my eyes, wouldn't even eat without being told it was allowed. Elena felt sick with horror, but she pressed on. "And that's what you plan to do to me? Oh, my dear Elena, you're going to be a much more interesting project than Catherine." She was weak underneath all that defiance. "But you have real strength. Breaking you will be a pleasure that lasts for years." His grip tightened until Elena gasped with pain. "And the best part is, no one will be able to help you. Once we're married, what happens between husband and wife is no one else's concern. You'll be in my castle, surrounded by my people, completely cut off from anyone who might dare to interfere." "You're hurting me," Elena said loudly, hoping Father Benedict could hear clearly. "Good," Prince Marcus replied, just as Father Benedict had said he would. "Pain teaches important lessons. And you, my stubborn princess, have many lessons to learn." That's when Elena heard the most beautiful sound of her life, the sharp knock of a sword hilt against her door. "Your Highness," Sir James's voice rang out, formal and deadly serious. "The king commands your immediate presence." "Both your Highnesses." Prince Marcus released Elena so suddenly she stumbled, his face going pale as he realized how much of their conversation might have been overheard. "What does His Majesty want at this hour?" The door opened to reveal not just Sir James, but Father Benedict, Sir Thomas, and Sir David, all with their hands on their weapons and their faces set in grim determination. "His Majesty wants to discuss certain allegations about your treatment of his daughter," Father Benedict said, stepping into the room and taking in the scene, Elena's red and swelling cheek, the finger marks on her shoulders, her obvious distress. "Allegations that have just been confirmed by multiple witnesses." Prince Marcus straightened, trying to regain his composure. "I don't know what lies you've been told, but we heard every word," Sir James interrupted, his voice like cold steel. "Your threats, your admission of what you did to Lady Catherine, your promise to do worse to Princess Elena. You've condemned yourself with your own mouth." For a moment, Prince Marcus looked genuinely afraid. Then, his expression hardened into something truly dangerous. "You think the word of servants and a doddering priest means anything against mine? I am a prince of a sovereign kingdom. Your king won't risk war over the word of commoners against royalty." "Perhaps not," Father Benedict replied calmly. "But he might listen to his own daughter when she confirms every word we heard, and when Lady Margaret testifies about the bruises you left on Elena's body." Margaret emerged from the dressing room, her face pale but determined. In her hands was Elena's dress from earlier, the one that clearly showed the handprints and bruises Prince Marcus had left on her arms and shoulders. Prince Marcus's mask finally fell away completely, revealing the monster beneath. "You meddling fools have no idea what you've done." The alliance between our kingdoms was the only thing standing between this realm and war with the eastern provinces. Without that protection, we'll find another way to defend ourselves, came a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see King Frederick standing in the entrance, his face dark with an anger none of them had ever seen before. Behind him stood several more guards and courtiers who had clearly heard at least part of the confrontation. "Father," Elena gasped, running to him despite her fear of Prince Marcus's reaction. King Frederick enfolded his daughter in his arms, his royal composure cracking as he saw her injured face and felt her trembling against him. "My child, forgive me. I had no idea. I thought I was protecting you, securing your future. Instead, I nearly delivered you to a monster." Prince Marcus made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Your Majesty, surely you won't take the word of servants over." "Silence," King Frederick roared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I heard enough of your own words to know exactly what kind of man you are. Guards, escort Prince Marcus and his retinue to the border. They're no longer welcome in my kingdom." "You're making a terrible mistake," Prince Marcus snarled as the guards moved to surround him. "My father will not forget this insult. There will be consequences, then we'll face those consequences with honor," King Frederick replied. "Better that than live with the knowledge that I sold my daughter's happiness and safety for political convenience." As Prince Marcus was led away, still making threats and protests, Elena finally felt the terrible weight of fear lifting from her shoulders. She was safe. She was free. The nightmare was over. Father Benedict approached the king with a grave expression. "Your Majesty, there's still the matter of the alliance, the trade agreements. Will be renegotiated or replaced," King Frederick said firmly. "I've been a king for 20 years, Benedict, but I've been a father for 19. Today I failed as a father, but I won't make that mistake again." Elena looked up at her father through tears of relief and gratitude. "What happens now?" King Frederick smoothed her hair gently, his touch so different from Prince Marcus's cruel hands. "Now you heal, my dear one. Now you remember that you are precious beyond any political alliance. And when you're ready, if you ever choose to marry, it will be to someone who treasures you as much as you deserve to be treasured." Elena's eyes found Sir James across the room, and she saw in his face the same love and devotion she had seen in the library all those months ago. Perhaps someday, when the memory of this night had faded, there might be room in her life for a love that was gentle and true. But for now, it was enough to be safe, to be valued, to be free. Elena had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, stronger and wiser for the ordeal. She was no longer just a princess. She was a woman who had fought for her own freedom and won. The story that had begun with terror and despair had ended with courage triumphant and love victorious. And in the years to come, when Elena ruled as queen, she would never forget the lesson of this night, that true strength comes not from the power to hurt others, but from the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The princess had saved herself, but in doing so, she had also saved every woman who might have suffered at Prince Marcus's hands in the future. Sometimes the greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when someone chooses to speak the truth, no matter the cost. Elena's story was far from over, but this chapter had ended exactly as it should, with evil exposed, innocence protected, and hope restored. The royal guard had indeed stormed the hall when they heard the princess cry, but in the end, it was Elena's own courage that had saved her from a fate worse than death.